A lot going on. A lot of fun to be had at the Garden these days, Steve. So that's nice to see, considering the way this year has gone and last year. What have you made of their streak so far?
Well, yeah, a lot of it has been against teams that were that are A, not good, or B, were depleted at the time. But I think the more important thing to look at is just how they're playing, what kind of basketball they're playing. And there's a lot more ball movement, a lot more body movement, cutting, those kind of things, and much better defense. So, they got a pretty good test on this past Friday against Denver,
Yeah.
and those things held up. So I think whereas a few weeks ago, there was pretty strong feeling on the Celtics and around the league that there were going to be some changes here, that things just weren't working and that they had to make things happen. Then the next step was they became pretty happy with their starting unit as it started to play better. And then now the moves at the deadline have them a little more confident with their bench. So, there's a whole different feeling than a month ago around the Celtics.
Yeah, and you mentioned that the ball movement and such, but we've also seen, really just tremendous defense. Even if you're not playing great competition, to have a defensive rating of 95.8 in the last 7 games here, where that's the best in the league, and the number 2 team is 103. That tells you just how well they've been defending. So that's been encouraging to see that they seem to be getting what Ime Udoka wants on that end.
Well, the thing is, they were playing that kind of defense before at times. A game here, a game there, a half here, a half there. Maybe even a quarter here or there. But they just didn't do it consistently. And now, that's why you saw them blowing these big leads. That's why you saw them collapsing in the fourth quarter of games. Their offense would go away, and it would seem to deflate their defense. But there's been a greater consistency. So the things that you thought all along with the Celtics, that they could be, at the very least, a very good defensive team, those things, and you saw that in flashes, those things are being held up more consistently now. So that's been the change, really.
You mentioned the trade deadline, and I think that's certainly worth going over and sort of where they are after that. Obviously a flurry of moves, not a blockbuster per se, but definitely some things that have changed the trajectory of this team and where they're heading. What was the big takeaway from the trade deadline for you?
Well, basically, they cleared out a lot of people that I guess, the guy that they kind of would have wanted to keep was probably Josh Richardson. They liked him a lot, and Langford, I think, they're gonna wonder what he's gonna do in San Antonio. But they were clearing out bodies here. They had the goal of getting under the tax, which they achieved. But in terms of what they ended up doing, I think it's pretty well looked upon around the league that you may have overspent for a guy like Derek White, but you got the guy you wanted. That's the way I look at it. This is a guy you targeted. This is a guy Ime thinks, hey, I know this guy. I can win with this guy. Brad Stevens liked him as well. So if you get the guy you want who fits, maybe that's worth overspending for a little bit. And when we talk about overspending, we're not talking about really any of the players you necessarily moved.
Right.
It's the draft pick this year and the pick swap in 2028. That stuff, picks have value because they're kind of like what's behind door number 3, and they're something that the teams, covet, especially as the draft gets closer and teams start falling in love with guys who might be in the range where the pick is. So, so the bottom line again is that you spent a lot to get a Derek White, but if he's the guy who fits, we talk about this all the time, Sean. It's context, right? If he's the guy that fits your context really well, then yeah, the move will end up being worth it. And it certainly looked good in the first game.
Yeah, very good defensive guard. I think if you have him and Marcus Smart on the floor, you're going to be able to wreak some havoc there. I think that's become obvious. Great to see him turn around that 3-point shot. That would be something that the Celtics could really use if he can do that. But we've also talked about needing a guy who can get into the teeth of the defense, and I think he can do that. He does have that ability to an extent. I mean, he's not Kemba Walker in his prime or anything like that. He's not Kyrie, but I do think he has the ability to scramble a defense. That's something that they've been missing.
Yeah, I agreed. And I think everything the Celtics are doing is done in the prism of what effect is it going to have on Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. And, if you get a guy like that, you said, that can get to the paint, that can spread the floor and is a willing ball mover, then that's kind of what that's really what they're seeking.
Yeah. Again, I'm Sean Deveney from Heavy.com Sports, and this is Steve Bulpett, our NBA insider. We're talking about the Celtics here and what they did at the trade deadline and what might be coming next. One thing that maybe gets overlooked, I think, in what the Celtics did is they consolidated contracts. You talk about moving out bodies, but I think it's also important that you take these contracts that are $2-3 million. And you consolidate them and you turn them into a bigger contract. That becomes important if there's a blockbuster to be made down the road. If there's a superstar available, now you've got Tice's contract at $9 million. You've got White's contract at $16 million. You've got Marcus Smart at $16 million. Robert Williams at $10 million. So many teams in the NBA don't have sort of that middle class of contracts, and it makes it hard to put together, a real offer if you're going to look for, some kind of trade. So of course we're going to see how these guys work out. I'm not already trying to get them shoved out the door, but that aspect of things, if let's say Bradley Beal becomes available, now I think you've got you've got the contracts that can match up, and you have some real assets that you could send back.
Yeah, I mean, if teams are going to be sending you an impact player, either by direct trade or by a sign and trade, they're going to want a package back. And, it's weird because teams also know that in the NBA, 4 quarters do not equal $1.
Yeah.
The dollar is the guy that carries the day. But teams will still make those kind of deals, particularly if you have some guys who are intriguing in that package. And yeah, I mean, I mentioned it in my first story after the deadline, that if Derek White works out really well, Marcus Smart himself would be a huge trade chip, because he's a guy that's got, he's looked at around the league. And again, we're not trying to trade guys, because right now, having those two together, one off the bench and then on the floor together gives you like a really serious perimeter defense. But those kind of guys are, Marcus Smart is looked at not only for what he does basketball wise, passing, shooting, defending, etc., but he's looked at as a culture change kind of guy, someone that can alter your room. Whereas he gets some heat in Boston for his shot selection sometimes, and this and that, he's kind of polarizing to a degree. The view around the league, I know I've tweeted this a few times over the years, is that Celtics fans would be stunned to know the kind of value that Marcus Smart carries for other teams. Excuse me.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Again, guys, if you have any questions, feel free to pop them into the comments, and we'll address those. But yeah, you look at where the Celtics are, and as important as the moves were that Philadelphia and Brooklyn made, I don't think it necessarily. It didn't win a title for anybody. I don't think. I still think the East is. And that's not to say the Celtics will sneak in and win the thing, but I still think the East is as open as it was.
It's open today, February 13. But we got to see what these moves do. I mean, James Harden and Joel Embiid could be, that could be peanut butter and jelly. That could be the best sandwich in the history of the world. Or it could be, it could be something that gets flushed.
It could be James Harden and Dwight Howard.
Yeah, I mean, but so that could work out incredibly well. And if you look at on paper, removing James Harden from Brooklyn, putting Ben Simmons into that spot, and it's okay. Here's a guy now that defends and is going to want to move the ball, and it's like Kyrie and Durant are saying thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, you don't want to shoot from the outside? Bummer. We'll take those shots. And in speaking of outside shooting, I think a real question with Brooklyn was going to be, people don't talk about Joe Harris.
Right,
having that guy, a guy like him to spread the floor. Well, now you've got Seth Curry in that role.
Right.
And that could be huge. So if Philly gets it together with their crew, if Brooklyn gets together with their crew, then I think either of those teams could steamroll the East. So it's like we just don't know it. I guess the hesitancy about you're saying the East is wide open is because those teams, right, are still a question mark. Is that
exactly
characterizing your?
I don't think they necessarily that they've. We just don't know how they're going to come together, and because of that, then there's still some question marks. And look, even if Brooklyn or Philadelphia does eventually get it together, it's going to take some time. And with 2 months before the playoff starts, we don't know if that's going to be enough time. If they're going to kind of shuffle and scuffle a little bit and then pull it together next year, so these could be moves that really work out more next year than this year. So it's going to be. I think that'll be pretty interesting to watch. What they're able to do. Celtics will get a look at Philadelphia on Tuesday in Philadelphia. They've got Atlanta at 2:00 today at home. So, a chance to keep that streak going there. One thing that does come up at this time of year, of course, Steve, is, everybody goes bananas for the leftovers, for the detritus of other teams, the buyout guys. There's always this big, I remember how important it was that the Lakers got Andre Drummond last year. They've been so focused on him, and they brought him in, and it didn't really make much difference, But it is something that does generate a lot of attention for this year. What do you see in the buyout market this year?
I see there'll be similar to your point about Drummond. There'll be a whole lot of excitement, but how will it come out in the end? I'm not sure. The teams I'd be looking at would be, the Lakers have got to do something, you'd think, right? Or maybe they just punt. I don't know. But Chicago I look at as a team that is good, that has a good setup right now of how their pieces fit, but they need people. They need a body. Miami could still, be a team that needs I think they're still looking for a large body, an extra person to throw at Joel Embiid in a potential Heat Philly series. So, there may be some stuff around the edges, but it'll be for the guys that get bought out. It could be a nice position to be in. You might be going back to their senior year in high school or junior year when they're being recruited by a number of schools. Only now the payments will be above the table instead of under the table.
Miami's interesting. They did free up a roster spot. I think Robin Lopez there could be an interesting fit. Tristan Thompson, like you say, they just need somebody else to, if they're planning on seeing Philadelphia at some point in the playoffs, then that's obviously a big concern for them, is that they don't necessarily have the size to keep up with him. But there doesn't seem to be a whole lot else on the market right now. It doesn't seem like, I think Dennis Schroeder getting bought out was interesting, and that could benefit the Celtics because they can't sign him again under NBA rules. The whole Antonio McDyess thing, whatever that was 20 years ago, where basically you trade a guy and then he gets waived and then you sign him back. The NBA does not want that to happen, so that's against the rules now. But when you look at Schroeder, if he takes a spot in Chicago or somewhere else, then that might free up another guy that maybe the Celtics would have missed out on.
By the way, someday and one of these, we need to tell some stories about colleges and payments and things like that, and just the funny stuff that there's some great one-liners that we've collected over the years. Yeah. Talking to people about their college experiences.
Gilbert Arenas, I've got some good Gilbert Arenas stories on that.
I've got some great Kentucky. Yeah, we got to do this. In fact, we should talk about this off the screen, but maybe it's a good tease if anyone's watching. But someday we should say we're going to do maybe during the Final Four or something like that. We can do a thing, whatever, about telling all our fun stories, all the one-liners that Sherman Douglas and Dirk Minifield and Billy Tubbs and all these great stuff, all these great stories of how teams or people openly joke about their
absolutely
their college experiences.
Yeah, I've heard a few of those for sure. But yeah, so to the buyout market, it could be disappointing. There's been talk about Gary Harris getting bought out in Orlando. I don't see any advantage for Orlando to do that. Where he could be a sign and trade guy if they needed him in the offseason. Eric Bledsoe, the Blazers have said they're not going to buy him out. So we've got Goran Dragic and Schroeder, I think, are the guys who could probably have an impact. And obviously, I don't think either one of those. Well, Schroeder, like I say, can't. And then Dragic, he's not coming to Boston.
Yeah. See, I think with the Celtics, they still have some roster spots to fill, open spots. Good jobs available. Good jobs at good wages. But I think if you're a guy that gets bought out and you're looking to for your next stop, you're looking at a place where you're going to get an opportunity because you've got to build your value for the next contract, right?
Right.
And I'm not sure guys are going to look at Boston as a place where they're going to get the opportunity. Obviously the first 6 or 7 is pretty well set in stone in Boston. The starting 5, Rob Williams, Al Horford, Tatum, Brown, and Marcus Smart, and then Derek White off the bench, Grant Williams off the bench. If they need an extra big, Daniel Tice is there, and Peyton Pritchard's is getting minutes, and at some point they're going to be looking at Aaron Nesmith. So are you going to be able to come in and displace anybody and get enough minutes that you can set yourself up for your next contract?
Yeah, it's right. I think you're going to have some other opportunities, and if you're looking for a ring, you're probably going to look elsewhere as well. But let me just put the name that comes up on Twitter anytime that the Celtics have a roster spot is Isaiah Thomas. What do you think? Is it finally time for them to just say, all right, come on and bring him back and make some people happy, even if he doesn't play a whole lot?
I would have at least made the offer a long time ago. But the question is with Isaiah, will there be opportunity there? I mean, look, I think the Celtics owe Isaiah Thomas more than they can give him. And I'm just talking about financial. I'm talking about just in an overall sense. What he did for this franchise during a downtime was incredible. players, like free agents and things like that, people like that, they look at places where, is this a place I can win? Is this some teams are seen as like Siberia, and that can change, over the course of a few years. The Celtics, after they made the Paul Pierce, Kevin Garnett deal with Brooklyn, were seen as, they got a lot of rebuilding to do. And they made a ton of moves over that time. Bodies in and out of here was a revolving door. But when they got Isaiah Thomas, remember that year, they came and made a push and actually made the playoffs. And he dragged them there.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just his scoring and his basketball stuff, but it was his attitude and how he brought the rest of the group with him. And then all of a sudden,
they finished 500 that year, but that was not expected. I mean, they were not expected to.
But all of a sudden now it's a team that Al Horford, who was the prize free agent, there's a team that he wants to come to. Okay, and then they do well, and it's the next year it's Gordon Hayward was the prize free agent, and all of a sudden Boston is a place to go, and I think a lot of that was largely because of Isaiah Thomas, and then he plays for you through a terrible injury that really derails his career. And as much as you'd say it was kind of a cold thing to do, the Celtics, when Kyrie Irving was available, you got to make that deal.
Yeah, right.
I mean, you got to. And they sent him off to Cleveland, where, the coach really didn't want him there. And, where are you? So, I mean, this guy gave you a lot. He gave you a lot on the floor. He gave you a lot physically, his body. So there's all kinds of reasons to bring him back. But I think the one concern might be that, he's more than Taco Fall at the end of the bench, where the fans are screaming for him. It might be, Ime might say, I'd rather not have that headache of people clamoring for a guy that really he doesn't want to give significant minutes to.
Yeah. I think Thomas himself would welcome just a chance to be on the roster and wouldn't necessarily, be a problem himself. But you're saying that it's more from the outside. You could see that being an issue.
Yeah. And look, I'm not sure. He's had some spots with other teams and done well here and there. But yeah, I've said this to him, of all the years, of 30 some odd years covering the NBA, he's one of the realest people I've ever dealt with. So I think he's a person that belongs in the NBA, basketball aside. And, and the guy is still working his butt off, and he's still keeping himself ready to play. But you can't tell me that if you get in a situation, any team in the league, if you're in a situation down at the end of a game and maybe he's down your food chain on your rotation, but, fouls happen, injuries happen, and you got to reach for someone in the pinch. Here's a guy that with, gonads of steel, and and he's going to be moving ahead full force. I wouldn't mind having a guy like that around at all.
Yeah, no, I think that would make a lot of people happy. Just a couple guys to look at before we bounce out of here, Steve. Probably no chance that two of the guys they signed into their hardship exemption, CJ Miles or Joe Johnson, I can't see them coming back. What do you think on that?
I think there's a chance of Joe Johnson. He was a guy that was really good in the room. One of those guys that a lot of the younger guys looked up to. So I think there's a possibility there if that's something he wants to do. But again, will there be opportunity? And hey, he's sitting. His next competition is what? Looking at the big three, or
right,
something like that. So maybe he says okay, but I don't think that's beyond the question.
Yeah, yeah. One guy who played well, who's probably not a fit for the Celtics, but I know that you've noticed how well he's played when he was in Minnesota and kind of had a chance to do a little bit of a comeback here. He's on a 10-day with Milwaukee, and that's Greg Monroe, another former Celtic.
Yeah, I mean, I think he'd be better. Well, the Celtics, I was going to say a younger team. Yeah, the younger team in the Celtics, I think, could really benefit from a Greg Monroe. But I'm surprised. I think he'll have some other options when the 10-day, and it might just be staying where he is.
Yeah.
But I know there were people in Minnesota that were bummed out that they weren't able to keep him because they were looking at the financials and the luxury tax, and we're afraid of that. But yeah, he's a guy I think that could be not just for on the floor, but for culture.
Yeah. Well, that's all I had for you, Steve. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And go Celtics, huh? 7 in a row, and we'll try to make it 8 at 2 p.m.
There's only one team I root for,
and that's who.
And they kicked the hell out of George Washington yesterday.
Dayton Flyers. Yep, I know. All right, thanks, Steve, and we'll talk to you soon. See you, everybody.